Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. We are into epilogue territory. We are into the final 5 episodes of conversation about Matthew, where we're looking back at the big picture of what we just walked through with this huge project we did together. But right now, we're in the part where we look forward to how things unfolded next and to tie up a few loose ends and obvious questions and plot trails that we might all be wondering about coming out of the book of Matthew. So we have looked at how Peter got restored, how things played out in that period of 40 days where Jesus was teaching and equipping the disciples to get them ready for what was going to happen next. Then last time around, they're asking about like some kind of reckoning, and can we just be done here? And then Jesus is like, nope, I'll keep track of all of the time stuff. That's a God thing. We'll handle that. And what you're going to do is be my witnesses under the power of the Holy Spirit to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And therein, that sets the trajectory for where like all of Christianity goes. And then Jesus ascends into the heavens, and there's instant paralysis. Like, oh, he's really gone this time. What do we do? And there are 2 guys there, presumably angels, who are like, go, do things. They gotta do the thing he said. Just in light of seeing that guy fly away after he came back to life. And also, like, remember he walked through a door one time, like not an open one, like through it. Yeah, that guy. So that's kind of a big deal, and it has implications. And you guys actually now know what those implications are. You should go tell people, because it's going to be good for everybody. And if it's not real polished, you don't have it all figured out yet, that's okay. Let's just take a swing at it. Paraphrase is mine, but I think it's a relatively reliable one. And so the disciples, they take action. They were told by Jesus to go to Jerusalem, hang out in Jerusalem, wait for the Holy Spirit to show up. They do that. They take a vote. They replace Judas, who's dead and gone, with Matthias. We get a little epilogue about Judas's death with more grisly details after that. And then probably the most important thing in this story after Matthew happens in chapter 2. It's not really another incarnation, but it's the arrival of God's presence in a new way, or sustained in a new way. The Holy Spirit shows up, not like a dove briefly, as we saw in the baptism in chapter 3, not as a presence who interacts with Jesus, leading him out into the desert to be tempted, like we see briefly in chapter 4, but like here. The Holy Spirit is like in Christians now. And that's weird. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, but as the New Testament unfolds, what we figure out is that these kingdom citizens, these sons, daughters, heirs, agents of the king, they don't just have like a new political alignment or a new identity or some kind of like new emoji or flag or stripes or colors or whatever they can put on their Twitter account. What they have is a transformed nature. They have a new nature. Later on in the New Testament, we get the language that the old is gone and the new has come. That somehow the fallen nature of humanity is being displaced, replaced, even regenerated from being dead in its sins and failure to something that is alive and new by the work of Christ and by the presence of the Holy Spirit. And if that sounds confusing to you, it's confusing. It's a very difficult concept to imagine any kind of interaction between the infinite maker of all things, who transcends the very notion of existence, who transcends even the question of why do things exist instead of not existing. This is a being who is outside of that question and sufficient in power and authority and position to decide, I think we should have existence. So understandably, it gets difficult to think about and define categories for when we encounter something like what we get in Acts chapter 2, where the Holy Spirit shows up, manifests in a visible, physical, external way, manifests in a miraculous way, manifests in terms of granting people the ability to see, kind of like those 2 blind guys back in chapter 9 who shouldn't have been able to see, but they could see. The Spirit shows up and does all of this. Now, it sounds insane, but it shows up in the form of little flicks of fire, little flames, little tongues of fire above the disciples' heads, presumably like in some kind of marketplace or public place in Jerusalem. And the text goes out of its way to say that there are all kinds of people in this cosmopolitan city from all over the place. And as all of these different people groups who are present, I guess, doing business here, maybe doing some religious stuff for the festival of Pentecost, if they were traveling, if they were part of the diaspora, Jews who were scattered, or maybe God-fearers, or maybe just godless business people. But you listen to these people groups, the Parthians, the Medes, the Elamites, people from Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, Libya, Cyrene, Rome, Cretans, Arabs. Another way to put that for this moment in history would be everywhere. All of the people were there. And these are not mildly distinct language groups. It would be fun sometime to do a little video or a special episode where we go through and we just look at how absolutely distinct the language groups represented in that little list are. But time-wise, I mean, let's just go with this. They're very distinct. And yet, somehow all these people from all the corners of the earth, they hear the message of the kingdom, stuff that echoes what we heard in the Sermon on the Mount, being explained to them right here in Jerusalem. And they can't help but take notice. I know we think of ancient times as being magical and weird and enchanting all the time, but they weren't. They were normal. People had jobs and they ate food and they drank beverages and then they would pee and poop it out and they would go to bed at night. And they liked stories and they'd laugh about things and get mad about things, and they had jobs and they'd worry about money and stuff. And then later they would die. They were just normal. This is normal people. And this was ridiculously weird for them, just like it would be ridiculously weird if this happened at like a shopping mall now. It's just bizarre. It gets everybody's attention. How can it not get everybody's attention? But then you got to think of this not as like a shopping mall. That's dumb. That's not the right thing to liken it to. Think of it like a international airport, like the airport that I was at in Dubai. The place was huge, and maybe the most linguistically diverse place I've ever been. It's like a beautiful crossroads in that terminal of all of planet Earth. Nobody sounded like anybody else. They couldn't put enough languages up on the menus at the restaurants to accommodate everyone. They just kind of went with pictures at the restaurant that I was at. And now think about how much you perk up when you're traveling somewhere really remote and you're like, oh my goodness, this is Midwest American, Omaha, Nebraska English. Huh, you're like me. Now imagine that happening simultaneously for all of these diverse people in this environment, while little magic fire is above it, like a video game or something. What on earth is going on? But then everybody at once gets that heartwarming feeling of, that's my language. That's how my heart talks. That's the language I dream in. That's the language I process ideas in. That's the language I hurt in and hope in. And they hear something that makes sense, the same promises, the same idea, the same vision for a kingdom that you and I encountered when we started on the Sermon on the Mount. I assume that we're hearing about all these upside down kingdom values, and blessed are things that theoretically in the world aren't blessed. But you know what? Those things on that kingdom value list, those should be the things we celebrate. That should be what's blessed. I think this taps in to the level of these people's hearts in a way that is unprecedented, and crazy numbers of people are like, yeah, cool. I don't understand everything about how all this works. And I don't understand all of the Old Testament references that Peter just threw out there in his sermon that he gave. And people, including Jews who still don't know what to make of what happened 40 plus days earlier, everybody takes notice. And so a ton of people become Christians in this moment. Now, think about the implications of that in terms of how our story in Matthew wraps up. We do have a conundrum at the end of Matthew, and the conundrum is, how is this going to work, though? How are we going to go from where we are to where supposedly this thing is supposed to go to the grand scale that Jesus is describing here? And we're going to talk about that conundrum tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.